Commander Kalos discovered the truth about Myra by accident. He had been walking through the lower levels of the station when he heard voices coming from behind a locked storage room door. The voices were speaking in hushed tones, and he recognized them as human. Curious, he used his command codes to open the door. What he found inside changed everything he thought he knew about the quiet girl from the kitchen. The small storage room had been converted into a makeshift medical bay. There were clean bandages hanging from hooks on the walls. There were bottles of medicine arranged on metal shelves. There was even a simple bed made from folded blankets, where someone could rest while they healed. Myra was there kneeling beside a human man who had been badly beaten. The man's face was swollen and covered in cuts. His breathing was shallow and painful. But Myra's hands moved over his injuries with the skill of someone who had done this many times before. She cleaned his wounds with gentle care and wrapped them in clean bandages. 2 other humans were helping her. One was holding a small light so she could see what she was doing. The other was preparing more bandages and medicine. They all looked up when the door opened, but none of them tried to run. They just waited to see what would happen. Myra stood up slowly and faced the commander. Her hands were stained with blood, but her voice was steady when she spoke. She did not try to make excuses or beg for mercy. She simply explained that humans were dying from injuries that could be treated. She had learned basic medical skills by watching the station's doctors work. She had collected supplies bit by bit over many months. The injured man on the bed was named Jin. He had been beaten by guards for working too slowly in the engine room. Without treatment, he would have died from internal bleeding. But Myra had stopped the bleeding and set his broken ribs. In a few days, he would be well enough to return to work. Kalos asked how many humans she had treated this way. She told him that she had helped over 30 people in the past 6 months. Some had minor injuries that just needed cleaning and bandaging. Others had been seriously hurt and needed surgery. She had learned to do simple operations using tools she had found or made herself. But the medical bay was not the only secret she was hiding. As Kalos questioned her more, he learned that she had created an entire network of human workers throughout the station. They shared information about which guards were most dangerous. They warned each other about inspections and punishments. They found ways to help each other get extra food or rest when it was needed. The network was not organized like a military unit. There were no ranks or commanders. Instead, it worked like a family. Everyone looked out for everyone else. When someone was hurt or sick, the others would cover their work duties. When someone was punished, the others would find ways to help them recover. When someone was desperate, the others would share what little they had. Myra was at the center of this network, but she was not its leader. She was more like its heart. The other humans came to her when they needed help or advice. They trusted her to keep their secrets and to find solutions to their problems. She had somehow created hope in a place where hope was supposed to be impossible. One of the humans helping in the medical bay was a woman named Yuna. She had been captured during the fall of Bizin and had been working in the station's computer systems. She had learned to access parts of the station's database that were supposed to be off limits. She used this access to find out when inspections were scheduled and which areas would be searched. Another helper was a young man named Day who worked in the maintenance tunnels. He had mapped out hidden passages throughout the station that the guards did not know about. These passages allowed humans to move around without being seen. They were used to transport medical supplies and to help injured people reach the hidden medical bay. The more Kalos learned about what Myra had built, the more amazed he became. She had created something that should not have been possible. Under the noses of trained guards and security systems, she had built a resistance network that operated on compassion instead of violence. She had turned the station's most vulnerable people into its most resilient community, but what impressed him most was how she had done it without causing any trouble for the guards or commanders. Her network was invisible because it helped people instead of hurting them. The guards actually benefited from having healthier workers who could do their jobs better. The commanders got better service because the humans were not constantly falling sick or dying from untreated injuries. She had found a way to resist oppression. that made everyone's lives better. She had proven that strength did not have to come from violence or anger. Sometimes the strongest thing you could do was to heal instead of hurt. Sometimes the most powerful act was to give hope to people who had lost everything. When Kalos asked her why she had risked everything to help strangers, she gave him the same answer she had given before. She said that humans were meant to take care of each other. That was what made them human. If they stopped caring about each other, then they would become just like their oppressors. She told him that every person she had helped made her stronger. Every life she had saved gave her a reason to keep going. The network was not just about helping others. It was about remembering who they used to be before the war. It was about staying human even in the most inhuman conditions. As she spoke, Kalos realized that he was witnessing something extraordinary. This small, fragile girl had managed to do what his armies had never accomplished. She had united different people behind a common cause. She had created loyalty that was based on love instead of fear. She had built something that would last because it was built on truth instead of lies. For the first time in his life, Commander Kalos understood what it meant to be truly strong. And he realized that everything he had been taught about power and conquest was wrong. The strongest person on the station was not the one with the biggest weapons or the most authority. It was the one who had chosen to heal instead of harm. It was the one who had chosen to build instead of destroy. Looking at Myra's blood-stained hands and determined face, he knew that his own life was about to change forever. The assembly hall erupted in chaos as Commander Kalos stood between the Inquisitor and Myra. Guards reached for their weapons, unsure who they should be pointing them at. Officers whispered frantically to each other, trying to understand what was happening. The humans watched with wide eyes as their fate hung in the balance. Inquisitor Vex stared at Kalos with pure hatred in his eyes. No one had ever dared to challenge his authority before. No one had ever stood in his way when he was carrying out imperial justice. He raised his weapon higher and aimed it at Kalos instead of Myra, if he had to kill a commander to maintain discipline, then so be it. But before the Inquisitor could fire his weapon, something else happened. Commander Thane stepped forward and stood beside Kalos. He said that he also believed the humans should be spared. He said that killing valuable workers was wasteful and inefficient. He positioned himself so that the Inquisitor would have to shoot through him to reach Myra. Then Commander Vex joined them. He had never liked humans, but he respected courage when he saw it. He said that anyone brave enough to face death with such dignity deserved to live. He said that the Empire needed people with that kind of strength, not people who were easily broken. More officers began to step forward. Some came because they genuinely believed in what Myra had said. Others came because they were tired of living in fear. Still others came because they respected Commander Kalos and trusted his judgment. Soon there was a line of officers standing between the Inquisitor and his intended victims. The Inquisitor realized that he was facing a full rebellion. He could not kill all the officers without destroying the station's command structure. But he also could not allow this challenge to his authority to go unpunished. He decided to call for reinforcements from his ship and crush the rebellion with overwhelming force. But as he reached for his communication device, the humans began to move. They had been watching everything with growing amazement. They had seen their oppressors risk their lives to protect them. They had seen aliens choose compassion over cruelty. They decided that if others could be brave, then they could be brave. The humans broke free from their restraints and surrounded the Inquisitor's guards. They did not attack or try to hurt anyone. They simply stood there, forming a human wall that blocked the exits. They sang songs from their homeland and held hands with each other. They showed the same quiet courage that Myra had taught them. Other humans throughout the station heard the commotion and came to see what was happening. They saw their fellow humans standing up to their oppressors. They saw alien officers defending human lives. They saw something that they had never thought possible. They saw hope becoming reality. The station's alien workers began to arrive as well. Many of them had their own reasons for hating the Empire. They had seen their own worlds conquered and their own peoples enslaved. They had been forced to work. for the Empire, but they had never stopped dreaming of freedom. Now they saw a chance to make that dream come true. The Inquisitor found himself surrounded by a crowd of humans and aliens who refused to let him continue his executions. He still had his weapons and his guards, but he was vastly outnumbered. More importantly, he was facing something that weapons could not defeat. He was facing people who had chosen to stand together instead of falling apart. Commander Kalos stepped forward and spoke to the crowd. He said that they had reached a turning point. They could continue living in fear and hatred, or they could choose to build something better. He said that the Empire's way of doing things had brought nothing but pain and destruction. It was time to try a different approach. He proposed that they declare the station independent from the Empire. They would create a new government based on cooperation instead of conquest. All species would be treated with respect and dignity. No one would be enslaved or oppressed. Everyone would have a voice in how their community was run. The crowd cheered at his words. The humans cried tears of joy as they realized they might finally be free. The alien workers embraced each other as they thought about. Commander Kalos made a decision that went against everything he had been taught as a warrior. Instead of reporting Myra's secret medical operation, he decided to help her. The choice felt dangerous and wrong, but also somehow right in a way he could not explain. That night he brought her a box of real medical supplies from the station's official medical bay. Myra stared at the supplies with wide eyes. There were bottles of antiseptic that would prevent infections. There were sterile bandages that would not cause additional pain. There were painkillers that would help her patients sleep while they healed. These were things she had dreamed of. Having but never thought she would see Dot, she asked him why he was helping her. He told her that he had seen what she was doing and that he thought it was important work. But the real reason was more complicated. Watching her care for the injured humans had awakened something in him that he thought was dead. He was beginning to remember what it felt like to protect instead of destroy. Over the following weeks, Kalos has found more ways to help without being obvious about it. He would schedule inspections at times when he knew the humans would be prepared. He would create longer rest periods during work shifts. He would look the other way when he saw humans sharing food or helping each other with difficult tasks. The other commanders began to notice that the human workers on their station were performing better than usual. There were fewer accidents and less sickness. The work was being completed more efficiently. Commander Vex complained that his own human workers were not as good as the ones working in Kalos's sections, but some of the guards were suspicious of the changes. Captain Roth had noticed that humans were not dying as often as they used to. He had also noticed that they seemed less afraid and more confident. He began watching them more closely, looking for signs of rebellion or conspiracy. One evening, Captain Roth caught two humans moving through a maintenance tunnel after their work shift was supposed to be over. He followed them to the hidden medical bay and discovered everything. He saw the supplies and the equipment. He saw Myra treating an injured woman. He saw how the other humans looked at her with respect and gratitude. Captain Roth was furious. He had always enjoyed having complete power over the human slaves. Seeing them organize and help each other made him feel like his authority was being challenged. He decided to destroy the medical bay and punish everyone involved. But first he wanted to find out who was really behind the operation. He grabbed Myra and demanded to know where she had gotten the medical supplies. The equipment was too advanced for humans to have stolen without help. Someone with higher authority must have given it to her. He threatened to torture her until she gave him the name of her accomplice, but Myra refused to tell him anything. Even when he hit her, she would not say where the supplies had come from. She knew that revealing Kalos's involvement would put him in danger. She had learned to endure pain, and she was willing to endure more to protect someone who had shown her kindness. Commander Kalos heard about the situation from one of his junior officers. Captain Roth had requested permission to conduct a full investigation of the human workers. He wanted to search every room and question every person until he found the truth. He was convinced that there was a conspiracy that went beyond just the medical bay. Kalos knew that he had to act quickly. If Captain Roth was allowed to conduct his investigation, he would eventually discover the truth. Other commanders would learn that Kalos had been helping the humans. He would be charged with treason and executed, but more importantly, Mara and all the humans she had helped would be killed. He went to Captain Roth's office and found the captain preparing his investigation reports. Myra was there too, sitting in a chair with her hands tied behind her back. Her face was bruised and there was blood on her clothing, but her eyes were still defiant. She looked at Kalos when he entered, but gave no sign that she knew him. Captain Roth explained his theory about the conspiracy. He was certain that someone in authority was helping the humans. He believed that a full investigation would reveal the truth. He wanted permission to use more aggressive questioning methods on the prisoners. Kalos listened to the captain's report and pretended to consider his request. Then he told Captain Roth that he would handle the investigation personally. He said that matters involving potential treason were too important to be left to junior officers. He dismissed the captain and told him to transfer all the evidence to his custody. After Captain Roth left, Kalos untied Myra's hands and helped her stand up. She was hurt but not seriously injured. He told her that her medical bay had been discovered, and that she would need to be more careful in the future. He also told her that he would find a way to protect her and the other humans, but Myra surprised him by saying that she was not afraid of being punished. She said that helping others was worth any risk. She had accepted long ago that she might die for her beliefs. What worried her was that other humans might suffer because of what she had done that night. Kalos walked through the station looking at things with new eyes. He saw human workers moving quietly through the corridors. He saw them helping each other and sharing their meager possessions. He saw them taking care of the sick and comforting the afraid. He realized that they had created something beautiful in the middle of all the ugliness. He thought about his own people and the empire they had built. It was based on fear and violence. It was held together by threats and punishment. Everyone was afraid of everyone else. No one helped anyone unless they were forced to. It was a civilization that created strength through cruelty, but the humans had shown him a different way. They had created strength through kindness. They had built loyalty through love. They had found hope in hopelessness. They had proven that there was another way to live. For the first time in his life, Commander Kalos began to question everything he had been taught. He began to wonder if his people had chosen the wrong path. He began to think that maybe the humans were not the ones who needed to be conquered. Maybe they were the ones who had something to teach. As he stood looking out at the stars, he made a decision that would change his life forever. He was going to find a way to protect Myra and her people. He was going to learn from them instead of destroying them. He was going to discover what it meant to be truly strong. The Imperial ship arrived without warning on a cold morning when most of the station was still sleeping. Commander Kalos watched from his command center as the massive vessel docked with their station. The ship was black as deep space and covered with weapons that could destroy entire planets. He knew what it meant. The Imperial Inquisition had come. Inquisitor Vex stepped off the ship surrounded by elite guards wearing crimson armor. He was larger than most of their species, and his face was covered in scars from countless battles. His eyes were cold and calculating as he surveyed the station. He had come here to investigate reports of unusual behavior among the commanding officers. The Inquisitor called a meeting of all senior staff within an hour of his arrival. He stood at the front of the conference room like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. His voice was harsh and unforgiving when he spoke about the importance of loyalty to the Empire. He said that recent reports suggested some commanders were becoming soft and weak. He had received complaints that human slaves on this station were being treated too well. There were reports of improved working conditions and fewer deaths. Some officers had suggested that the humans were being allowed to organize themselves. This was completely unacceptable and would be investigated thoroughly. Commander Kalos sat in the back of the room trying to appear calm while his heart raced. He knew that Captain Roth must have sent reports to the Imperial headquarters. He also knew that other officers had noticed his strange behavior. He was walking into a trap and there was no way to escape. The Inquisitor announced that he would be conducting a full review of station operations. He would interview all commanders and inspect all facilities. He would also be testing the loyalty of the officers through practical demonstrations. Any sign of weakness or sympathy toward the slaves would be punished severely. That afternoon, the Inquisitor began his investigation. He questioned Commander Vex about his methods for controlling the human workers. He inspected the mining operations and the manufacturing facilities. He reviewed security reports and disciplinary records. Everything he saw seemed to confirm his suspicions. Then he announced his test. He said that 50 humans would be selected at random and executed publicly. This would serve as a reminder to the remaining slaves about the consequences of disobedience. It would also test whether the commanders had the strength to watch their property be destroyed without showing weakness. The execution was scheduled for the next morning in the main assembly hall. All station personnel were required to attend. The Inquisitor said that he would be watching the faces of the commanders carefully during the executions. Any sign of hesitation or mercy would be noted and reported. Commander Kylo spent that night walking through the station corridors. He knew that Myra would likely be among the humans selected for execution. Her medical activities had made her a target. Even if she was not chosen initially, the Inquisitor would probably select her specifically because of the reports about her activities. He found her in the kitchen preparing what might be her last meal. She was working calmly and efficiently as if nothing unusual was happening. When she saw him, she bowed respectfully and continued her work. She did not ask him what was going to happen. She already knew. He asked her if she was afraid. She told him that she had been afraid every day since the war began. But she had learned that being afraid was not the same as being defeated. She said that she was proud of what she had accomplished. She had helped people, and that was enough. The next morning, the assembly hall was filled with station personnel. The Inquisitor stood on a raised platform wearing his ceremonial armor. Behind him were the 50 humans who had been selected for execution. They were all young and healthy workers who could have lived for many more years. Myra was among them. She stood in the front row with her hands bound behind her back. Her face was calm and peaceful. She looked out at the crowd as if she was searching for friendly faces. When she saw Commander Kalos, she gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. The Inquisitor began his speech about the importance of discipline and control. He said that mercy was weakness and that compassion was foolishness. He said that the Empire had become great by being ruthless and cruel. He said that anyone who forgot this lesson would be reminded through blood and pain. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of begging for mercy or crying in fear, Myra began to speak. Her voice was clear and strong as it carried across the silent hall. She talked about the beauty she had seen in different cultures and species. She talked about the possibilities that existed when different peoples worked together instead of fighting. She said that the Empire had become strong through conquest, but it could become greater through cooperation. She said that every species had something valuable to offer. She said that destroying others only made everyone weaker in the end. She said that true strength came from building instead of breaking. The Inquisitor laughed at her words. He called her a naive child who understood nothing about the real world. He said that her weakness was exactly why humans deserved to be enslaved. He raised his weapon, preparing to kill her and end her foolish speech, but her words had affected others in the room. Some of the alien officers began to remember their own homeworlds before they were conquered. They remembered the art and music and literature that had been destroyed. They remembered the families and friends they had lost. They began to question whether all that destruction had really been necessary. Even some of the guards began to shift. Uncomfortably, they had been taught that humans were inferior and worthless. But this small human girl was showing more courage than most warriors they had known. She was facing death with dignity and grace. She was using her last moments to try to help others instead of asking for help herself. Commander Kalos watched as something changed in the room. Myra's words were having an effect that no weapon could achieve. She was making people think about their choices and their lives. She was planting seeds of doubt in minds that had never questioned authority before. He realized that this was her real power. not the medical skills or the organizational abilities. Her real strength was the ability to inspire hope in hopeless situations. She could make people believe that things could be better. She could make them want to be better. The Inquisitor sensed the change in the room and became angry. He decided to end the speech by killing Myra immediately. He aimed his weapon at her heart and prepared to fire. The hall became completely silent as everyone waited to see what would happen. That was when Commander Kalos made the most important decision of his life. He stepped forward and placed himself between the Inquisitor and Myra. He looked directly at the Inquisitor and said that the human was under his protection. He said that killing her would be a waste of valuable resources. The Inquisitor stared at him in shock. No one had ever dared to challenge his authority before. The other commanders looked terrified. The guards reached for their weapons, unsure of what to do. The humans watched with hope and fear as their fate hung in the balance. Commander Kylos knew that he had just signed his own death warrant. But he also knew that he could not watch Myra die without trying to save her. She had shown him what real courage looked like. Now it was his turn to be brave. Commander Kalos had ruled over 12-star systems and destroyed countless worlds, but he had never been curious about a slave before. Every morning he found himself walking past the kitchen just to catch a glimpse of the small human girl who served his tea. He told himself it was just routine inspection, but deep down he knew he was lying. The girl moved through her duties like a ghost. She never spoke unless spoken to, and she never looked directly at anyone. But there was something about the way she carried herself that made him think of a blade hidden in silk. She was broken on the surface, but something underneath remained unbroken. Something that all their beatings and cruelty had not been able to touch. Today he decided to watch her more closely. He positioned himself behind a support beam in the dining hall where he could see the kitchen door. Other commanders might think he was being foolish, but Kalos had learned to trust his instincts. Those instincts had kept him alive through 3 major wars and countless battles. Myra came out of the kitchen carrying a tray of food for the morning meal. Her steps were careful and measured. She had learned to move in a way that would not attract attention. But as she walked past a table where 2 guards were sitting, he noticed something interesting. The guards were blocking her path on purpose. They wanted her to ask them to move so they could refuse and make her wait, but the girl did not ask. She simply stood there holding the heavy tray and waited. Her arms began to shake from the weight, but she did not complain. She did not beg. She just waited with infinite patience until the guards got bored and moved out of her way. When they did, she bowed slightly and continued on her way. Most slaves would have shown anger or fear in their eyes. But when Kalos looked at her face, he saw something else. He saw calculation. She had known exactly what the guards were doing, and she had chosen the response that would cause the least trouble for everyone. She was not just enduring the abuse. She was managing it. That afternoon he found an excuse to visit the kitchen. During the quiet hours, the girl was there alone cleaning dishes in a large metal sink. Her sleeves were rolled up and he could see the fresh bruises on her arms. Some were purple and some were yellow where older injuries were healing. Her hands moved steadily through the soapy water as if the pain meant nothing to her. When she heard his footsteps, she turned and bowed respectfully. She did not seem surprised to see him there. She did not seem afraid either. She simply waited for him to speak or leave. Her dark eyes were calm and steady. He had prepared several questions to ask her, but now that he was standing there, he felt strangely unsure of himself. She was so small and fragile-looking. Her clothes were worn and patched, but clean. Her hair was tied back with a piece of string that might have once been white. Everything about her spoke of poverty and defeat, but her posture was straight and proud. Finally, he asked her why she never fought back against the guards who tormented her. He expected her to give him some weak excuse about being afraid or being too small to fight. Instead, she looked directly at him for the first time and said something that shocked him. She said that fighting back would only make things worse for the other humans. When one slave was punished, all the others suffered too. The guards would take their anger out on everyone they could find. So she had learned to absorb as much cruelty as possible so that others might be spared. Kalos had conquered. species that were stronger and more advanced than humans. He had faced warriors who showed no fear of death, but he had never met anyone who chose to suffer so that others might suffer less. The concept was so alien to him that he had trouble understanding it at first. In his culture, strength was everything. The weak existed only to serve the strong. Mercy was seen as weakness and compassion was seen as foolishness. But this small human girl was showing him a different kind of strength. A strength that came from caring about others more than yourself. He found himself returning to the kitchen more often after that. He would make up reasons to inspect the food or check on the equipment, but really he was studying her. He watched how she interacted with the other human workers. He saw how they looked at her with respect and gratitude. He saw how she would share her own food with those who were hungrier. He saw how she would take on extra work when others were too tired or too hurt to do their jobs. The other commanders began to notice his frequent visits to the kitchen. Commander Vex made jokes about him developing a taste for human cooking. Commander Thane suggested that maybe he was getting soft in his old age, but Kylos ignored their comments. He was beginning to understand that there was more to this species than anyone had realized. One evening he stayed late to watch her work. The kitchen was empty except for the two of them. She was preparing bread for the next day's meals. Her movements were precise and efficient. She had obviously done this task thousands of times before, but she still put care into every step as if it mattered. He asked her about her life before the war. She told him about her family in simple words that carried deep pain. She spoke about her father who had worked hard to provide for them. She spoke about her mother who had taught children and who had always found ways to help their neighbors. She spoke about a life that had been full of small joys and simple pleasures. As she talked, he began to understand something important. Humans were not just another species to be conquered and enslaved. They were people with their own dreams and hopes and loves. They had built something beautiful on their world before his people had destroyed it. And this girl was carrying the memory of that beauty inside her even in this dark place. When she finished her story, there was silence between them. Then she asked him something that no slave had ever dared to ask before. She asked him if he had ever been happy before the wars began. The question caught him completely off guard. He realized that he could not remember the last time anyone had cared about his happiness. For the first time in centuries, Commander Kalos began to wonder if conquest was really the only way to live. The metal floor was cold under Myra's bare feet as she walked through the narrow hallway that led to the kitchen. Her small hands held a cleaning cloth that was already dirty from wiping down the tables in the main dining area. The cloth smelled bad, but she had learned not to complain about anything. Complaining only brought more pain. Her left arm still hurt from where Guard Captain Roth had grabbed her yesterday. His claws had dug deep into her skin, leaving dark purple marks that looked like ugly flowers blooming on her pale arm. She had been carrying a tray of hot soup when he stopped her in the corridor. The tray was heavy and her arms were shaking from carrying it for so long. When she tried to explain that the soup was getting cold, he had squeezed her arm until she dropped the tray. The hot soup had splashed everywhere, making a terrible mess on the clean floor. The other guards had laughed when they saw what happened. They called her clumsy and stupid. Some of them made jokes about how weak humans were compared to their own kind. Captain Roth had made her clean up every drop of soup while it was still burning hot. Her hands had turned red from the heat, but she did not cry. She never cried anymore. Now she was back in the kitchen, getting ready to serve tea to the alien commanders who ran the space station. The tea had to be perfect or she would be punished again. She had learned to make it exactly the way each commander liked it. Commander Vex liked his tea very hot with no sugar. Commander Thane wanted his tea warm with 3 drops of honey. Commander Kalos was different from the others. He always asked for his tea the same way, but he never seemed to care if it was too hot or too cold. The kitchen was the only place on the station where Myra felt safe. It was small and warm and filled with the smell of cooking food. The other human workers came here when they needed to rest or when they were hurt. They would sit in a corner and share stories about their old lives back on Earth. Sometimes They would cry together, but they always made sure to stop crying before the guards came back. Myra remembered her old life sometimes when she was working alone in the kitchen. She had lived in a small apartment with her mother and father in Seoul. Her mother had been a teacher and her father worked in a factory that made computer parts. They had been happy together even though they did not have much money. Her father would come home tired from work, but he always had time to help her with her homework. Her mother would make soup that smelled so good it filled their whole apartment. That was before the sky had turned red and the alien ships had come. Myra had been only 16 when the war started. She remembered hiding in the basement with her family while the city burned above them. The sounds of fighting had gone on for days. When the silence finally came, they thought it meant the war was over. They thought it meant they were safe. They had been wrong. The alien soldiers had found them 3 days later. They had broken down the door and dragged everyone outside. Myra had watched her father try to protect her mother from the soldiers. She had watched him fall to the ground and never get up again. She had watched her mother scream until one of the soldiers hit her so hard she stopped making any sound at all. After that, Myra had been put on a ship with hundreds of other humans. They had been packed together like animals in small metal rooms. Many people had died during the long journey to the space station. The ones who survived had been divided up and given different jobs. The strong ones were sent to work in the mines. The smart ones were sent to work with the computers. The young ones like Myra were sent to work in the kitchens and dining rooms. That had been 2 years ago. Now Myra was 18, but she looked older. Her black hair had grown long, and she kept it tied back with a piece of string. Her clothes were old and had holes in them, but she kept them as clean as she could. She had learned to move quietly and keep her head down. She had learned to do her work perfectly so no one would notice her. The water for the tea was ready now. She poured it carefully into the special cups that each commander used. Commander Vex's cup was black metal with sharp edges. Commander Thane's cup was made of some kind of blue stone that stayed cool even when filled with hot liquid. Commander Kalos used a simple white cup that looked almost human. As she arranged the cups on the serving tray, she heard footsteps coming toward the kitchen. She quickly checked her appearance in the reflection of a metal pot. Her face was clean and her hair was neat. The bruises on her arms were covered by her long sleeves. She picked up the tray and walked toward the door. The dining room was huge with tall windows that looked out into space. She could see stars and distant planets through the thick glass. Sometimes she wondered if one of those tiny lights was Earth. She wondered if there were still people living there or if the aliens had destroyed everything. The 3 commanders were sitting at their usual table, talking in low voices. They spoke in their own language, which sounded like metal scraping against stone. Myra had learned to understand some of their words, but she always pretended not to know what they were saying. It was safer that way. She approached the table slowly and set down the first cup in front of Commander Vex. He did not look at her or acknowledge that she was there. To him, she was just another piece of furniture that happened to move. Commander Thane grunted when she placed his cup down. He sometimes made jokes about humans, but at least he seemed to know she was alive. Commander Kalos was different. When she set his cup down, he looked directly at her face. His eyes were golden and seemed to see everything. She quickly looked away and stepped back from the table. She had learned that making eye contact with the commanders was dangerous, but she could feel him watching her as she walked back toward the kitchen. The other commanders continued their conversation, but Commander Kalos remained quiet. His golden eyes followed her until she disappeared through the kitchen door. Myra did not know why he always watched her like that. She did not know that he was beginning to see something in her that the others missed. She did not know that her quiet strength was about to change everything.